The farewell gathering in the station's secondary break room had the specific, warm quality of an event that was genuine rather than performed, which was the best kind of event, and the kind that Cam Doran had not always been able to count on at contract endings. Some stations had the performed version, the mandatory social acknowledgement of a departing worker, the going through the motions of people who were thinking about the next rotation rather than the person leaving. Varath 7 had given him the real version, which he was grateful for in the plain way of someone who had worked somewhere for 3 years and had found at the end of it that the somewhere had been worth working. He had been here long enough to know people specifically. The logistics coordinator, Vel Soren, who had an absolute command of the station's cargo sequencing, and who had twice pulled his rotation out of scheduling disasters with the calm efficiency of someone who had seen worse and had not been concerned. The maintenance lead, a Cathari man named Tavan who had spent the first month showing him the station's particular mechanical personality, the pressure variances in the secondary bay, the sensor array in the eastern corridor that ran 2 degrees warm and had done so for 11 years, and was going to continue doing so, because the cost of calibrating it was higher than the cost of accounting for the variance, the specific, accumulated character of a working station that had been running long enough to have character. The dock crew from the second year's rotation, who had given him the specific, unsentimental respect of people who judged competence and had found his adequate, which was higher praise than it sounded. He made his rounds. He said the goodbyes he meant, and meant them specifically, because specific goodbyes were the honest ones, and Cam had been doing contract work long enough to understand that the specific was what lasted, not the general warmth of a farewell gathering, but the individual moments, the particular acknowledgement of what a particular person had been in the particular context of 3 years of shared work. He had said goodbye to Sael Vor-Ithana at the gathering. He had said it in the professional register, which was the register he had used for 3 years, and which was the correct register for a shift supervisor and a contract worker on the same rotation, and which had been the correct register throughout, and which he had maintained with the thoroughness he brought to all things that were correct. She had received it in the professional register, and had wished him well, and had said the project at the Eastern Array was going to miss his approach to the maintenance sequencing, which was accurate and professional and correctly calibrated to everything they had been to each other for 3 years. He had his departure shuttle confirmation in his personal device. He had the new posting's welcome documentation, which he had read twice because reading incoming documentation thoroughly before arrival was the habit that had made him consistently useful in contract work, and which he saw no reason to abandon. He had his belongings loaded and his quarters cleared, and the chapter closed in the operational sense. He walked the familiar corridor. He had walked this corridor for 3 years, the route from the secondary common spaces to the residential section, the specific, worn quality of a passage that had been used by the station's rotating population long enough to have the ambient character of a place that knew what it was for. He knew the lighting variance at the 40-meter mark, where the overhead panel had been replaced 2 years ago with a unit that ran slightly brighter than the original. He knew the sound difference at the junction, where the ventilation architecture created a specific, low-frequency resonance. He knew the corridor in the way of somewhere that had been ordinary for long enough that the ordinary had become its own kind of particular. He was at approximately 40 meters from his quarters when she stepped into the corridor. She was facing him. Not aggressive, the posture was not the posture of confrontation, but the posture of someone who had made a decision, and was in the execution of it. The specific, rigid determination of someone who had built up to a thing, and was past the point of the building, and was now in the doing, and was not going to step aside without saying the thing she had come to say. He could read the cost of it in her posture from 20 meters. He had worked alongside her for 3 years, and had learned to read her posture in the professional sense. The shift supervisor quality of her stillness, the specific way she stood when an incident report required her full attention, the quality of her presence in a rotation briefing when everything was in order versus when something needed addressing. This was none of those postures. This was the posture of someone who had been gathering everything they had for something that was going to cost it. He stopped. She said, "I cannot let you leave without knowing that if you stayed, you would not be staying alone." The corridor held the statement in the specific way of spaces that have been given something larger than their usual contents. The ventilation doing its low-frequency resonance at the junction, the bright panel at the 40-meter mark doing its slightly too bright thing. Everything the corridor was continuing to be, while something was happening in it that the corridor had not been designed for. He looked at her. She was looking at him with the full, direct attention of someone who had spent everything they had on the decision to say the thing, and was now in the exposure of having said it, which had its own specific quality. Not the managed presentation of someone performing a disclosure, but the plain, open quality of someone who had disclosed, and was now simply in the fact of it, and was not managing the fact. The professional distance, she said, was not mutual. He looked at her. He looked at the corridor. "I want to be specific," she said, because she was always specific. He had known this for 3 years in the professional context and was now receiving it in a different context, and it was the same quality applied differently. "I am not asking you to stay. This is not a request. This is information. I am ensuring that you leave with complete information because the alternative is you leaving without it, and I have decided that you should have it." "What information?" he said, which was not the most precise response available but was what arrived, because the corridor was producing a recalibration that was ongoing, and precise responses were a downstream product of the recalibration rather than an upstream one. "That the distance you maintained," she said, "was maintained on one side. That the end of the contract was the first moment I could say this without it being a thing I should not say. That what you are leaving behind is not only the work and the colleagues." She paused with the pause of someone who has arrived at the thing that cost the most and is saying it because she came to say it. "That I spent 3 years choosing not to say something because the time was not right. And that the time is right now and you are leaving in the morning, and this is the last moment the time will be right, and I chose to use it." He stood in the corridor. He had managed the professional distance with the thoroughness he brought to all correct things. He had been good at it. He had been specifically and continuously good at it, and the being good at it had been the kind of good that required effort rather than the kind that was effortless, and he had not examined this distinction closely because examining it closely was not a thing the professional distance required him to do. "You waited for the end of the contract," he said. "The contract made it inappropriate," she said. "I was your shift supervisor for the first year, adjacent rotation for the second. I had no rotation connection to your assignment in the 3rd year, but the station context remained." She looked at him steadily. "I did not want to be someone who said something she should not say. I wanted to be someone who said it when she could say it correctly." She paused. "This is me saying it correctly." He looked at his quarters, which were 40 meters away and contained nothing because he had cleared them, and at his departure shuttle confirmation, which was in his personal device and was scheduled for morning, and at the posting documentation he had read twice, and at the careful architecture of a departure that had been organized correctly and was now in a corridor with something it had not accounted for. "How long," he said, "how long did you know?" She was quiet for a moment. The quiet was not avoidance. It was the specific, honest quiet of someone choosing the accurate answer rather than the comfortable one. "The 2nd month," she said. He looked at her. "There was an incident report," she said. "The pressure variance in the secondary bay, you were the one who flagged it first. You flagged it correctly and you documented it thoroughly, and you did not overclaim what you knew. You noted the variance, noted that it exceeded the standard tolerance, noted that the cause was uncertain, and that further assessment was warranted." She looked at him. Most contract workers in the 1st month either ignore variances or escalate them past the evidence. "You documented what was true. The second month. He thought about the pressure variance. He thought about the incident report, which he had written with the thoroughness he brought to incident reports, because incident reports were the documentation that mattered when things went wrong, and doing them correctly was not optional. That was an incident report, he said. Yes, she said. It was also when I understood that you were going to be someone I needed to not say things to for the duration of the contract. He stood in the corridor and looked at the woman who had spent 3 years not saying things and had stepped into the corridor to say them, and he did the thing he did with significant information. He organized it in the order that produced clarity. He had a departure shuttle in the morning. He had a posting waiting. He had a clear path from here to the future he had arranged. He also had an incident report from the second month that had apparently been the beginning of something he had not known was beginning. I have a shuttle in the morning, he said. I know, she said. The posting is already arranged. I know, she said. The goodbyes are already said. I know, she said. I was at the gathering, I said mine. She looked at him with the full, direct attention, the non-professional version, which was the same quality of attention applied to a different subject, and he was understanding this with the specific, concrete quality of an accounting that was finally reaching its result. The most significant thing he had encountered in 3 years of a station he was about to leave. I know all of that. I am not asking you to undo any of it. I am giving you information. What you do with the information is yours. He looked at her for a long time. I have to think, he said. Yes, she said, you do. She stepped aside. He walked past her toward his quarters, and the corridor was the corridor it had always been, and he walked it in the specific, changed quality of someone for whom a familiar passage had become something that was going to be significant in the accounting he was doing, and he reached his quarters, and he went inside, and he sat in the empty room where his belongings were not because his belongings were loaded on the morning shuttle, and he thought. The thinking took 2 hours. He was thorough about it, because he was thorough about things, and because the thinking deserved the thoroughness that the situation deserved, and the situation deserved everything he had available. He organized the information in the order that produced clarity, and then reorganized it, because the first order had been the order of someone managing the situation toward a predetermined result, and the honest order was the order that started from the information rather than the conclusion. The information was, he had a shuttle, a posting, a new chapter already in motion. The information was also, the professional distance he had been maintained with effort, which was visible to him now in the specific way that things were visible in retrospect that were not visible while you were maintaining them, because maintaining them had occupied the cognitive bandwidth that noticing them would have required. He thought about the incident report. He thought about the second month, which had been the month he had understood the station's particular mechanical character, and had found the understanding interesting in the way he found competence interesting, the specific pleasure of working in a context where the people around him were good at what they were doing. He thought about Sael Vor-Ithana running the rotation briefings with the precise, non-punitive quality that he had logged as a professional characteristic. The briefings that were always accurate and always fair, and that communicated, in every iteration, someone who understood the difference between what could be helped and what could not, and who organized her responses accordingly. He thought about the lunch he had not stayed for. He thought about the end-of-shift debriefs that he had kept to operational content, which he had kept to operational content because operational content was the legitimate subject, and not for any other reason that he had been willing to examine closely. He thought about 3 years of a person being excellent in the professional context, and him treating the excellence as a professional characteristic rather than a personal one, and about what it had required to maintain that treatment, and about what the requirement had been requiring him to manage. He thought about the posting waiting for him, which was a good posting. The documentation had been clear about the scope of the work, and the scope was work he was good at and wanted to do. And the station it was on had the kind of infrastructure that suggested the contract would be organized correctly. And the 6 months of the initial contract had the specific, structured quality of a beginning that was likely to extend into something longer if the work went well. He thought about 6 months. He had been on the station for 3 years, and Sael Vor-Ithana had spent 2 years and 10 months of those 3 years waiting for the end of the contract to say something she had known since the 2nd month. He had spent 3 years maintaining a professional distance that had required effort, which meant it had been managing something, and the something it had been managing was available to him, now in the specific, concrete way of things that became visible when the management was no longer the operating frame. He sat in his empty quarters and thought about the corridor. Not the statement was in the accounting and was being accounted for, but the specific physical fact of it. She had stepped into the corridor. She had done it with the rigid determination of someone who had built up to a terrifying thing and was executing it at the cost of the building up. And the cost had been visible in her posture from 20 meters. She had said what she had come to say and had stepped aside and had not asked him for anything, which was the most specific thing about it. She had come to give him information, not to ask him for a decision, not to make a claim, not to obligate him to any response. She had come to ensure that his departure, if he departed, happened with complete information. That was all. That was everything. He thought about that. He thought about it for a while, and then he stopped thinking and went to find her. She was in the observation corridor off the secondary common space, the long gallery that ran along the station's exterior hull and looked out at the freight corridor, the stars doing their patient, indifferent thing beyond the reinforced viewport. She was standing at the viewport in the specific way of someone who had come somewhere to be somewhere that was not their quarters, which was the way he had come to the observation corridor himself on the nights in the 2nd year, when the rotation had been the kind of rotation that required somewhere to stand for a while. He was not surprised she was here. He had known, in the way he knew the station, that she would be somewhere like this rather than her quarters, that she had come to say something and said it, and was now in the specific, open state of having said it, which was not a state that quarters were suitable for. She heard him coming. She turned. She looked at him with the expression that was not managing anything, the same expression from the corridor, the open one. He stood beside her at the viewport. "The new posting," he said. "It's a 6-month initial contract." "I know," she said. "You mentioned the timeline at the gathering." 6 months is a rotation length," he said. She looked at him. "I once renegotiated a rotation's end date," he said, "because the project required it." She was quiet. The freight corridor was doing its freight corridor thing beyond the viewport, the working station in its working station rhythm, the ordinary continuing the way the ordinary continued regardless. "The new posting is good work," he said. "I want to do it. I'm not—" He stopped. He organized the sentence in the honest order, which was the order that started from the information rather than the conclusion. "I'm not asking you to wait again. I'm telling you that 6 months is a finite interval with a defined end, and that defined ends were something he had organized logistics around before, and that the posting's communication infrastructure was documented in the welcome materials as comprehensive." She looked at the viewport. She looked at him. "You're telling me," she said, "that 6 months is not a permanent departure." "I'm giving you information," he said. "What you do with it is yours." She looked at him for a long moment. The expression did the thing that expressions did when they were receiving something they had been braced for not receiving. The specific, brief movement of something held tightly, finding that it did not need to be held quite so tightly. Not relief in the simple sense. Something more specific than relief, the particular quality of someone who had done a terrifying thing and had not received the worst available outcome and was processing the not receiving. "That's what I said," she said. "Yes," he said. "I found it accurate." She looked at the freight corridor. She was quiet for a moment, with the quiet that was consideration rather than avoidance. "The 2nd month," he said. "The incident report." "What specifically?" "The documentation." she said. "The way you documented what was true rather than what was convenient. You noted the variance and noted that the cause was uncertain and noted that further assessment was warranted. You did not know who would read it. You documented it correctly because correct documentation was what the situation required regardless of whether anyone would notice." She paused. "I noticed." He thought about the incident report. He thought about writing it in the first month's specific, attentive quality of someone in a new placement doing everything correctly, because the correct start produced the correct trajectory. He had not been thinking about who would read it. He had been thinking about the variance and what the variance warranted. "I should tell you something," he said. She looked at him. "The lunch," he said. "In the second year, the shift end on the 14th rotation cycle, I left the break room because you came in." She was quiet. "I had been staying for the shift end lunches," he said. "It was a habit I had developed in the first year because the logistics team used the shift end lunch to do informal coordination, and it was useful. In the second year, the rotation changed, and the informal coordination moved to the morning briefing, and the habit had no operational justification, and I kept the habit anyway for 6 weeks because—" He stopped. He looked at the viewport. "I left on the 14th cycle because I had been staying for a reason that was not operational, and the not operational reason was why I left." She was quiet for a long moment. "6 weeks," she said. "6 weeks," he said. "You maintained the professional distance for 3 years, and it had been requiring effort since the second month," she said, with the specific, dry quality he had heard in the professional register, and was now hearing in a different register, and was the same quality, and was also, in this context, something he was finding he had not been managing as a professional characteristic. "Yes," he said. "That is," she said and paused, "a significant amount of effort." "It was correct to make," he said. "You were the shift supervisor, the context required it." "Yes," she said, "it did." She looked at him. "You are no longer on my rotation." "No," he said. "You are no longer on any rotation on this station." "No," he said. "My contract ended at 1700. She looked at the viewport. She looked at him. Outside, the freight corridor was doing its patient, working station thing, and the stars beyond it were doing their patient, indifferent thing, and the station was continuing in the specific, reliable way of a place that had been running long enough to have character, and was going to continue running after everyone currently on it had moved on to whatever came after. "Walk me to your quarters," he said. She looked at him. "You walked this corridor for 3 years," he said. "So did I. I would like to walk it with you, once before the morning shuttle." He looked at her. "There is a bright panel at the 40-meter mark that runs too warm. There is a ventilation resonance at the junction. I have been walking past both of them for 3 years, and I have not walked past them with you, and I would like to, if you are willing." She was quiet for a moment in the way that was not avoidance. "The panel at the 40-meter mark," she said. "The unit was replaced 2 years ago. The original ran correctly. The replacement has run warm since installation, and the calibration cost exceeds the operational impact, so it has been logged as a known variance." "I know," he said. "I read the maintenance log in the first month." "Of course you did," she said, with the dry quality. And it was the first time in 3 years she had said something in that register to him rather than to the operational context. And he was noting this in the specific way he noted things that were significant. The best sentence he had heard on this station, which was a thing he was not going to say in the observation corridor at 1 in the morning on his last night, but which was in the accounting and was staying there. They walked. The corridor was the corridor it had always been, the bright panel, the ventilation resonance, the worn, familiar passage of a working station that had been doing its work for long enough to have the specific, accumulated character of a place that knew what it was. They walked it together, which was new, And the newness was a different quality than the familiarity, and was not a replacement of it but a different thing, that the corridor was now containing alongside the 3 years of the corridor that had not contained it. He had a shuttle in the morning. He had a posting waiting, 6 months, good work, a communication infrastructure that was documented as comprehensive. He had a corridor, and 3 years of it, and a woman walking beside him who had stepped into it and said a true thing at the cost of everything it cost her to say it, and who had not asked him for anything except the completion of the information, and who had given him the information and had stepped aside. He had the information. He had been doing the accounting. At the door to his quarters he stopped, and she stopped, and the corridor held them both in the late station quiet of a working facility between shifts, the ventilation resonance doing its low, specific thing at the junction. "I will send you the communication infrastructure details," he said, "from the new posting, when I have them." She looked at him. The full, direct attention, the open one, the one that was not managing anything. "I will send you the maintenance log," she said, "from the 40-meter panel when they finally calibrate it." He looked at her, she looked at him. The corridor was the corridor, and outside it the station was the station, and in the morning the shuttle was the shuttle, and 6 months was 6 months, and none of these facts were in conflict with any of the other facts, which was the result the accounting had produced, which was not a resolution but was a beginning. "The communication infrastructure documentation," he said. "I will send it tomorrow, from the shuttle." "I will read it," she said, "when it arrives." He looked at the door to his empty quarters, and at the corridor, and at her. "The incident report," he said. "From the 2nd month I still have the file." "So do I," she said. "It was a good report." "Thank you," he said. She looked at him with the expression he was going to be thinking about on the shuttle in the morning, and in the new posting's first week, and in the 6 months before the defined end of the initial contract, which was the expression of someone who had done the terrifying thing, and had received the beginning of what was on the other side of the terrifying thing, and who was in the specific, particular quality of that beginning. "Safe travels," she said. "I'll be in communication range by the 4th day," he said, "of the transit." "I know the transit schedule," she said. "I was your shift supervisor." "You know the general transit schedule," he said. "I will send you the specific." She looked at him, the dry quality, the best sentence. "All right," she said. He went inside. She walked back down the corridor with its bright panel and its ventilation resonance, and 3 years of them walking it separately, which was going to be the history of the corridor, and which had this in it now, which was also going to be the history of the corridor, which was what histories were. He sat in his empty quarters in the specific, particular quality of someone who has done the accounting and has arrived at a result, and is in the result now, in the present tense, which was the best tense for results that were beginnings rather than conclusions. He opened his personal device. He composed a short message, not long, not performed, the plain version which was the only version adequate to the situation. "Tomorrow, the shuttle. 4th day, communication range. I will send the infrastructure details." See, he sent it. He lay in his empty quarters and looked at the ceiling of a room he had lived in for 3 years and was leaving in the morning, and thought about a corridor, and an incident report, and a 6-month contract with a defined end, and a communication infrastructure documented as comprehensive, and the specific, satisfying quality of an accounting that had finally arrived at the right result. He slept well. In the morning the shuttle was the shuttle, and he was on it, and below him, Varath Industrial Station 7 was the station it had always been, and in it someone who had stepped into a corridor and said a true thing was reading a message on her personal device, with the expression that was her expression for things she was going to be precise about. Her response arrived at day 4 when the communication relay came into range. It was short. It was plain. It was, he read it 3 times to be certain, the version that started from the information rather than the conclusion. "Communication infrastructure confirmed. The panel has still not been calibrated. I have submitted a 3rd maintenance request." He read it a 4th time. He put his personal device in his pocket. He went back to work, which was the work that was waiting and was good work and was going to be done well. And 6 months was a finite interval, and finite intervals had defined ends. And defined ends were things he had organized logistics around before.